Behind a podium, my style for teaching is, you would all know this, but if you tell students the Phil Donahue way of speaking to a crowd, you say that to students, they like, boom. I like to mingle, I like to walk around, I like to make contact, I like to, and in a classroom it's always fun because you do one of these, and if you're paying attention, it's like, okay, we're good. It's like, are you asleep yet? Of course, I hope I got caffeine in the coffee so I get really going here. It's a pleasure being here. It's awfully early for me. It's summer break. But it's great. It's nice to know that when you get up early, the sun is coming up, and you can get a lot done before noon instead of sleep. But I was asked to come to present to you. Barbara asked me, and she said, well, what do you want to talk about? And I'm like, she knows me. She goes, you only have so much time, Dan. I can go for a while if I get going. So we're going to try to compress it down. But she said that there seems to be a lot of questions about conventions, superdelegates, what's going on. There's a lot of misinformation. And of course, this week has to be the one week where we have these historic hearings with the FEI director and the issue of what we call mens rea in the law, intent versus negligence, civil standards versus criminal standards. We have shootings going on. I got very little sleep last night. What happened in Dallas last night is tragic. We have a lot of things going on. But we're going to talk about conventions, and we can do that. But of course, we're open to anything after that. Instead of laying something out and saying, well, here's what you need to know, because I'm sure many of you are up on this. That's why you're part of League of Women Voters. That's one of the best virtues of the League of Women Voters, is having women be plugged into political affairs and being at the forefront for change. And that's been the mission for League of Women Voters since its inception. My wife, she doesn't belong here, but she did for years in Ohio. Being someone who was in politics in Ohio, the League of Women Voters always gave politicians, and always did there, I'm sure they do here, a fair shake. Not judgmental, no bias. You're nonpartisan. I'm an unaffiliated voter. I used to be registered to a party. I'm not any longer. I think that my party affiliation is I'm an American. That should come first, not someone's partisan view. This gets us in trouble, though, don't we? We get in trouble when we start to say certain things, because if you're not saying what I want to hear, you're clearly not on my team. But I think we're all on the same team. We all want what's best for America. But along these lines, to start it off, all I had some thoughts was, how many of you read the letters of the editor? How many are as entertained by them and as frustrated by them? It's like an obsession, isn't it? You're like, I shouldn't read this. This upsets me. And my blood pressure's going up, but I can't. It's an obsession. I got to read. Well, I read this one. This one's from June 28th from the Herald Tribune. And I just want to read this to you. And maybe many of you read this. But it was from a woman in Osprey, and she said, it's refreshing to learn that the British system for voting is so straightforward. The British? People come into the precincts, get into their booth, and fill in the oval on their form. I don't know, is she British? Does she know that? But she says it. The votes are counted, the winner is pronounced. Our system's very different. Aside from the people's choice, we also have the mystery of delegates, superdelegates, and the electoral college. It's so confusing, I doubt most people really know how much the actual citizens of the United States have to do with who gets elected president. It's no wonder we're all so skeptical. Could somebody please explain to me why we need the electoral college, delegates, and superdelegates anyway? And I thought that was a perfect way to start this morning, because this is the prevailing view, is we're confused. And one of my pet peeves is the media doesn't do their job anymore. The media used to be informative, and they used to be watchdogs of our government and kept us up to speed. Now the media is partisan, and they tell us talking points and narratives that are somewhat geared to divide us, I think. They've shirked their role under, I think, the First Amendment as the watchdogs. As I put in the book, I think a lot of the times now they're lapdogs. They just go along to get along because it means they can get a scoop on something instead of really worrying about whether they're informing us properly what's going on and playing that role. And that's where we get to this confusion. So I just brought that. So on the topic of conventions, the serious thing that frustrates me, and maybe some of you as well, is this notion that political parties somehow represent all of us. And therefore, the machinery created by the political parties internally, their rules, their delegates, their structures, somehow are undemocratic because they don't seem to represent everybody. For example, here in Florida, this is a closed primary state. If you're not registered to a particular party, you can't vote. I can't vote. Some people say, well, that's undemocratic. But they don't understand that the primaries are run by the parties themselves. This is to choose their nominee, not your nominee, their nominee. They control the ballots on the state level, and the system works out party-wise across the board. And if you say something to somebody like that, they're going to say, well, I don't understand. My guess is most people that are involved with legal women voters, you know, these are parties, right? The convention is a party's party. Balloons, get everybody excited, get the base activated, and go. But is it undemocratic? And most people aren't aware that years ago in 1970, California had what was called the blanket primary. And the concept was very unique. They had a list of people on a ballot, and they didn't show any affiliation with the party. So you didn't go in there going, well, it's got an R after their name or a D after their name, I'm voting for them. You don't know anything about them. Well, they're on my team. California decided they were going to put on a ballot that didn't have any of that designation at all. So that when the voter came in, they're free to choose anybody they want. And then a case came along, the California Democratic Party versus Jones, 1970. And then the Supreme Court ruled that parties have the right under the First Amendment to freely associate, and that elections and primaries could be controlled by the parties themselves. So when people say that's not democratic, it's been ruled to be constitutional under their First Amendment right. So let's talk about the delegates, because now I just gave you the idea that the Supreme Court has ruled that they can control primaries. Through the state legislatures, they can do it. And you close a primary in order to keep what they call party purity, so that people who are unaffiliated or registered in one party can't cross over and vote in the other party's primary in order to skew the election. Party purity. And this gets into the notion of the superdelegates. How many are confused by superdelegates? This is a common problem in our country because no one's really explained what the superdelegates are, and it's kind of boring, except for the fact that it's somewhat humorous right now. And I say humorous because it's ironic, and I'll tell you why. Superdelegate came about in the 1970s, because the Democrats themselves felt like it was unfair for women and minorities to have to compete with elected officials to be a delegate. The number one thing you need to get elected is called name recognition. I think everybody would accept that. Name recognition. If you've got the name, you're way ahead of everybody else. That's why they spend so much money on advertising. Drop the name, get familiar with the name. So they felt it was unfair because women and minorities could not become delegates to the convention because they didn't have name recognition. They weren't elected officials. And if you ran against somebody who was your local mayor or your local member of the House of Representatives, how are you going to win? Women were denied opportunities to become delegates because they were competing against the elected males. African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, this is what happened. So they said, let's open it up. Let's create a level class of superdelegates who are already the elected officials and the high-ranking party officials. This will open up the delegate election for everybody else, so that it's everybody else's that can compete with each other, and they're usually the rewarded ones who are the activists. The people that knock on doors and make phone calls, the people that nobody ever hears about, the people of the community that are active in their party. So they did that, and it opened it up. The problem is that it became one of those where those delegates may be bound to a candidate. Superdelegates were not. But their theory was this creates party purity, which goes along the lines of why we have closed primaries. The Republicans for a while jumped on that and said, we're going to, a little late, but we're going to do the same thing to be inclusive. And then after a while they said, look at how disgusting this is. This is disenfranchising so many people. We're going to eliminate it. To this date right now, there are 249 alleged, they don't call them superdelegates, but they have elevated status in the Republican Party. But it's not like the superdelegates and the Democrats. The problem is that, and the reason I find it humorous, is that right now the establishment of the Republican Party wishes they had superdelegates because it would eliminate Donald Trump for being there. The irony. Oh, the irony. So it's a boring idea when you think about it. It's an interesting concept, but it could be boring academic. But when you see their application today saying that, oh, that's terrible, it's undemocratic, boy, I wish we had that. And that may be what happens at the next convention, because that's the perfect segue into what conventions are. Conventions are the the 4-year annual nominating conventions for their nominees for the presidency and the vice presidency, but it's also an opportunity to get together and talk about their rules committees, to establish the rules. The Republicans call them green sheets. I don't know why they call it green, but they're always get printed on green paper too. Maybe they got a thing about green paper. But those are those rules, and they do them every 4 years at their convention. You don't get to see much of that on television. That's that stuff that goes on during the day. You get the highlighted stuff at night with the balloons and the speakers and the show, because that's to activate the base and get them excited. And those rules are reviewed every 4 years. The problem is that traditionally the nominee gets to set the pace for those rules. The nominee is then the head of the party until the election. And if you win, you become the informal head of your party. President Obama is the informal head of the Democratic Party. They get to have decisions on where their party money goes to support candidates down ticket and initiatives. In this case, if Donald Trump is the presumptive nominee, he will be the face of the Republican Party, and his people will be able to dictate the rules. The problem is, if they don't have superdelegates, the elected officials within the party are threatening to upset the apple cart. As of yesterday, there were 78 members on that rules committee out of the 159 who have absolutely declared now that they're going to support Trump. They figure, well, we're going to fracture if we don't. And that's the issue, that if you know your history, you know in 1912 we did see the Republican Party fracture between Roosevelt and Taft, and it literally handed the election to somebody who was considered to be a little bit on the outside looking in, Woodrow Wilson. And of course, boy, did they regret that. They regretted that dearly. And that's when Theodore Roosevelt decided he had to run again as a bull moose, the independent. It just split the party, and that causes problems. So they're learning from those examples. We hope they learn from history, not to do that again. And that's why they're going to come behind Donald Trump. Whether you like him or not, he's going to be, I would imagine he is the nominee. But will his people be able to direct the Rules Committee? And this is the argument is oh, he's an outsider. You can't say you're an outsider and then control it from the inside. And that's why he was at Capitol Hill yesterday. Media is telling you that he's there trying to work with Republicans. I thought he was a Republican. Work with them, and he's going to be the head of their party. And it probably was more of a discussion of, will I have your support at the convention? And then we'll worry about our relationship afterwards. So conventions are essentially big parties, and it's to activate the base and get them going. And that's why, to this day, the conventions have been pretty boring lately. This might change. The Republican convention can be very, very informative, very interesting, because of the potential for disruption. You all recall those smoke-filled conventions. I remember growing up being enthralled when they go, from the great state of New Jersey, and they'd have the banner up there with and then they get up there, and our favorite son, and you didn't know the outcome. You were like, oh, wow, this is dramatic. Nobody knows. There's speculation. Oh, there's all this. Who's going to be? It goes back to even when Harry Truman was nominated. He had no idea he was going to be nominated until FDR got him on the phone. They dragged him literally from his car. His wife screamed at him going, "You're not doing anything." And he's like, "Yes, mother, I know. I'm listening." And they dragged him in there, and he goes, "I'm not doing it. I'm not allowed to do it. I don't want it. I'm new. I have no aspirations." They put FDR on the phone. He goes, "You want me to lose? It's your fault if I lose." He's like, hang up the phone. He's like, he goes, "He's in." He's like, "I am?" And that night, people were shocked. Harry Truman becomes the nominee to become the vice president for FDR. Wow. So you may recall the convention of '68 in Chicago, the Democratic convention, where Lyndon Johnson admits now that he had Air Force One ready to go. Engines were running to fly to Chicago to accept the nomination after he said he wasn't going to take it. This he had planned all along to come as the phoenix and come out, "I will save you all, and I will run again." So we had drama, but lately we haven't had any drama happening. It's been a balloon fest, and canned speeches, and keynote speaker. Who's going to be the future star by giving a keynote address on that second to last night, and the hoopla. Today, we might have a different story. So stay tuned. This could be interesting. But conventions are parties. They're not really for everybody else. And unfortunately, don't you feel sometimes like we're stuck with the candidates that they provide us? And then you have to ask yourself, Why don't we have better candidates? Then you have to ask yourself again, who would want it?
Oh, yeah.
Some of our best presidents have been people who never wanted it, who didn't have that aspiration, who fell into it, and really were driven by their conscience to be the best for the institution of the presidency, not for their own legacy. I like to bring up Harry Truman all the time because he spoke direct, and he had the lowest popularity rating of any president when he left office. It was almost like a tumbleweed went through Washington when he left. Goodbye. And today we look back and we go, wow, his policies that he pursued were very unpopular. They turned out to be the right policies for this country. When are we going to get back to that? And I'm an affiliate, so if you find someone that's good on one side or the other, I cross-ticket vote all the time. I will vote for anybody if I feel that they're the best person. I don't care whether they have an initial after their name. And it just brings up my own experience. I ran for public office in a prior life, and I went to a fundraiser with a member of the House of Representatives, and a woman came up to me and gave me a big check. And I was stunned. I'm like, whoa, I don't know you. This is great when women start giving you money. You don't even know. What's it for? What do you want? And then what do you want? Okay, what's the payback? And she said, oh, you have the right letter after your name. And that struck me. It struck me that someone is going to give their hard-earned money and donate to somebody with such blindness, not even aware of what I stood for, didn't even know who I was, because I was endorsed by the party and I had the right letter after my name. And how much of that do we have today? And how healthy is that? Especially now the Supreme Court has ruled that money is free speech. I guess it depends on how much money you have, depends on how much speech you get for free. But there's nothing free, is there, in this world? There's no free lunch. They even charge you to come to this. I want my money back. I hope you eat well. Get your money's worth. So conventions, delegates, of course, are picked as activists in their party. Not everybody can be a delegate. I have a step-great-grandfather who is essentially, he's 103 plus, Joe Newman. He used to live here. He still drives. And he wanted desperately to be a delegate. And he went to the convention and he did all these things, and he's an activist, but they kind of like, you're old. That's a little discriminatory. I think he's sharp as a tack. But how do you become a delegate? You can't just walk up there and sign up and say, I want to be a delegate for this party. You have to be someone who is part of the party as an activist, and you generally have to be somebody who's with the winning team. You've got to be one of the supporters of that candidate. So conventions are interesting, have interesting dynamics, pure politics, what we call log rolling. Log rolling is, if you don't know, log rolling is I scratch your back, you scratch mine, which is the hallmark of all politics. I give you a little, you owe me. I want to run for leadership, I never call in my markers, now I am, you owe me. Scratch my back, you owe me. Politics is a swap and a trade. But how much of it is a swap and a trade that benefits us as a nation? That's a concern. And as someone who's unaffiliated, I like to call them all out when I don't believe that they're putting the country first, but they're putting partisan party politics ahead of it. So conventions are coming up. Stay tuned. But the drama's gone, isn't it? What's the drama left? Who's going to be the VP? Mm-hmm. And they no longer do that at the convention either. They already announced that beforehand as well. So there's no real drama except for let's see if they're all going to play nice with each other. And that's the issue. Will they play nice? And they need to, because it solidifies their base. And without your base, you can't win. You need those activists who are willing to make those phone calls, knock on those doors, canvass those neighborhoods, and be out there. Not somebody who just sticks a yard sign in their yard, but somebody who also is willing to put one in your yard. And if you're willing to have them put one in as well. So those is a thumbnail sketch of the superdelegates, the delegates, and conventions. I'm talking rather quickly because someone suggested maybe if I talk quickly, there's an opportunity to talk about what's been going on lately. There's so much. And as someone who likes to consider themselves a historian, I'm fascinated. And I spoke to a group about a year ago, and I was stunned when someone raised a question about our state of affairs, and the individual claimed to be an economic historian. I don't know what that is. A historian's a historian. He said, well, I'm not really an American historian, but I'm an economics one. And they said, well, are things that bad? And he said, this is the worst it's ever been. I almost fell out of my chair. And they saw me and they're like, how do you feel about that? I'm like, I'm not talking, it's not my night. You got to come back. You got to tell us what you think. I came back and I didn't tip my hand. I said, all right, I'm back. Great. Remember that guy who told you it's the worst it's ever been? Yeah. And there was a lot of people that had been around a while. I said, was the Depression a high point? Was slavery a high point? Was women not having the right to vote a high point? Is this the worst it's ever been? How can this be the worst? People didn't have the right to vote. People didn't have any civil liberties. We were in a depression. We've survived, so we had a world war we didn't know we could win or not. People today think World War II, we just announced that we were in it, we won. No, this whole country became a war machine. So the question is it always that bad? Don't we always go in cycles? And don't we hopefully come out stronger in the end because of all the bumps, the warts, the pimples, the scars we've gone through? That's what makes this nation great, is we've been tested by fire. So I am very optimistic, but I have to tell you, being in the classroom was my fulfillment of cranking out students who came out with the enthusiasm to recognize that maybe my generation, they look at me and maybe my generation blew it. And maybe they're the key to the future. To get them politically active is the only choice we have, because they are the future. So we have to guarantee they have quality education. We have to guarantee that they have access to information. We have to guarantee they have the right to become delegates and superdelegates and become our future leaders. That's the fulfillment I I just retired. I got out of being in the classroom and teaching government to students, because it's not an abstract thing. It applies to you every day. One of the hardest concepts that some teachers I get questions from teachers all over the country, readers, people that are actually the scorers. How do you teach public policy? And I always tell my students, I ask them early, what's public policy? They don't know. That sounds really tough, doesn't it? Public policy, ooh. But public policy is everything. The air we breathe, our education, our social security system, our roads, our economy, schools, tuition. Public policy is everything under the sun that we could possibly think of what we address in our society. And when you put it that way, it's like, okay, can we move on? Some of these teachers spend all year trying to figure out how to teach public policy. It's everything we do. So it shouldn't be hard for you to understand that public policy affects us in every way, shape, or form. And how do you affect change in public policy? You must be plugged into the political system. It's the only way to create change and innovation. So my motivation for my students is they can do it, they will do it. And now I'm fortunate I've got students who I had years ago who are now becoming active in the political process. And whether they have an R after the name or a D after the name, I've always said to them, if you're going to be one of those, be a good one. Because there are good Republicans, there are good Democrats. We're not all one thing or the other. I like to believe that I'm the party of the Americans. I'm an American, and I think that's something we have to get away from. About if you disagree with me, then you're not genuine. Disagreement is what formed this country. We were built on compromise. And if you read any of the Federalist Papers, you'll know that was the intent of the framers. That we didn't like factions, but the idea was they would create compromise. Where are we at today with that? Mm-hmm. And why do we allow it to happen? People complain all the time, but guess what? Did you vote? Are you a participant in the voting process? Are you exercising your right to affect change? It's not going to matter. Tell that to the people who didn't vote, and this is what you get. And then, how influential are the people that do vote? Because of the strong number of people who don't. So I'm always encouraging people to get active. If you want to get into a party, do it. Do it right. Knock yourself out. Do it. Because the objective is not to win one party over another. It should be the objective, what's going to make this country stronger, better, and more, I'd say more in tune with the needs under public policy of our country. So Barbara's like, you only have so much time. Yeah, so take a deep breath. I've done questions. I'd love to hear questions. I like questions because that's where I can get everybody plugged in. I saw this one first, but it's in my blind spot. I'll come back. All right, go ahead.
Just on the superdelegates, you explained it as an attempt to democratize the process. What I've read is that superdelegates came about as a way to avoid the Jimmy Carter being nominated.
That's how it's being applied now retroactively to look at.
Could you
Jimmy
repeat
Carter
that
was an
question?
issue with that.
Could you repeat
And that's where the Republicans now
Dan, can you
would like
repeat
to
the
do it.
question?
Yeah, the question
Yeah.
was originally some people will say that the superdelegates came originally not as to democratize, but to try to, as a phenomenon, the Jimmy Carter phenomenon, to try to maybe eliminate that phenomenon again, or to embellish it one way or the other, because
to avoid
it.
To avoid someone who was not endorsed by the party hacks from getting the nomination, and that superdelegates are not a way of democratizing, but a way of making sure that the party endorsed person wins the nomination.
And that is the effect of the superdelegate. That may not have been the original intent, but that's the effect. And that's why I brought up that the Republicans wish they had him right now, because they would go against, the establishment would go against the Trump presumption of nomination. But yes, this is the problem. It's funny you say that, because William Howard Taft was a president. In history, most people don't treat him that well, because he followed Theodore Roosevelt, a tough act to follow. But he did say something when he became Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He said, Congress needs to understand that when they make law under great intentions, there are some serious consequences that they didn't consider. And that's part of the problem with superdelegates, in that it has a great concept, but how does it apply? And it may take away from you're right, it's not a democratic way of looking at when you look at it overall, but by the same token, neither are primaries. When people can't vote, because like me, I'm not allowed to vote, and unless there's a local initiative or issues involved, I don't go. So when people say, well, you didn't vote last time, well, I couldn't. And this is where my phenomena where I like to go after the Bernie folks, when they say, they did this and they screwed him in New York because he couldn't vote. I couldn't vote in New York for 3 decades. It's a close primary. I couldn't vote in Florida. You don't see me saying that I've been stripped of my rights. It's the way the system was designed, because unfortunately we have a two-party system and they dominate. So you ask yourself, the next question is where in the Constitution are political parties mentioned? Nowhere. So how can they have so much power? Because how much money would it take now to start a new party? Unfortunately, politics has not become the Abraham Lincolns and the Stephen Douglas debates of intellect. It's become who has the deepest pocket. And that's unfortunate. And I think that's what's going to hurt many good citizens of the United States from stepping off the curb and taking a leap of faith to one. And that's unfortunate, because we do have brilliant minds in this country who really want to be on the same page. But now the superdelegates could go against it. And my theory is let's just start another party. Anybody got $1 billion?
Next question, Dan.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Early on, you made a statement about I'm paraphrasing, we used to have nonpartisan news coverage or something to that effect.
Yeah.
Correct me, my long ago history course, before the advent of radio and television, wasn't political news really partial, really partisan? Because you'd have 2 or 3 newspapers in a town, and one would be very Republican and one would be very Democratic, and it wasn't at all, even though everybody knew where they stood, but it was not impartial.
Absolutely. We've seen twists and turns, but it hasn't been the predominant factor of partisan news. We used to have investigative journalists who would look at news, but you bring up to mind exactly that. Andrew Jackson didn't like the press in Washington when he got there. So what did he do? He brought Francis Blair, his good buddy, who started a newspaper, the Washington Examiner, to just print everything about how great Andrew Jackson is. Which is funny, because if you look at our political history, Andrew Jackson's got a hand in just about everything. Because in fact, the first political convention was in 1832. And it was Martin Van Buren pursuing an objective for Andrew Jackson as president. So you're absolutely correct. There were elements of media designed specifically to be strictly partisan, but they were so overt that the public knew that. They knew when they read that paper that it was going to be partisan. Today, we don't have that. Today we've got people tuning into a wide array of media without understanding that they are partisan. They actually believe that it's neutral, and it's not.
Fair and balanced.
Yeah, fair and balanced. I don't like throwing that out because that's, oh, you don't like Fox. I watch them all. They frustrate me. They entertain me. But it's not quite the media that we used to have. And I've had a couple terms that I've used in my book that are now being picked up by political scientists. They'll never quote me, and that's fine as long as I contributed something in political science. And one of them is a label for our media today. And I like to use it, and you got to think it through. Is that the ideologically oriented for-profit media?
Yeah.
And this came about during, and if you love Reagan, great, but under Ronald Reagan, we went from the issue of access to the media, it was prime time. If a candidate runs for office and gets 30 minutes on television, you had to give 30 minutes to the other guy. Well, now it's called the reasonable access rule since Reagan turned it around at the FCC, which is you do, as long as you can pay for it. And you may recall in 2008, we had a 90-minute infomercial by Barack Obama, and John McCain had no money, and he just was furious. The night before the election, every channel was showing a 90-minute infomercial about Barack Obama, and McCain had no money, so he couldn't match it. And people that were undecided at the last minute, that may have influenced them. So, yes, we've always had political media, but they were usually so blatant that people knew that. Today, there's a blurry line between what you're hearing is it really neutral or is it partisan? The Fox one's interesting because the Hillary Clinton thing with Benghazi, I found a clip and I used it in my class. It was one of their top guys talking about Benghazi, and there was flashpoints all over Benghazi, scandal, breaking news, all the trick, everything on the tickler on the all this stuff, and in the middle he said, but there's no evidence of wrongdoing. And then he went on. And I show it to my students, and they're like, whoa, boy, she's bad. And I'm like, and I'm not a Clinton supporter, so don't, I'm not going that way. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I'm praying about that for somebody else. But then I went to 138 in the segment, and I went right there and I said, oh, but how many of you heard this? But there's no evidence of wrongdoing, and none of them heard it. They're like, oh my God, if you just snip that out there, he's admitting that this is all subterfuge for a bias. And that's what triggered it. They got it after that. Unfortunately, they went back to their parents and brought the links to them, and they said, that teacher. What's he teaching you? But it wasn't me. It was actually the reporter himself saying, but there was no evidence of wrongdoing. So there is a bias in our media. You could say the same thing about the left media as well. We all have biases. We all have biases. I don't like to say it this way, but you have biases because you're females. I have bias because I'm a male. If you're a grandparent, you have a bias. We have big biases. No, grandparents. No, we really have some.
Yes, we
but
do.
Depending on where you're from. If you're from Ohio or New York or wherever, that's part of your makeup here. You know, I'm a Midwesterner. I fit right down here. No, this is perfect for me, yeah. But if if you're on the east coast of Florida, it's a different attitude, a different bias. Our age is a bias. Our education is a bias. There's like 8 political socialization issues of bias. So we have to accept that, and I accept it. I don't think it's a negative. It's who we are. But it doesn't mean that we don't admit it. And that's the problem, and that's my view of media today, is that they're blatant about it.
Well, Fox is blatant about it, and in a sense that's okay because you know where they're coming from. But it's the other stations I have a problem with, like MSNBC.
MSNBC, forget about it.
It's going to be a liberal station.
Yeah, MSNBC, is a problem. They have the same people on over and over as their pundits, and they're all experts on everything, and they're expert in nothing. It's a problem. Yeah. But you say that you know that Fox is partisan. Believe it or not, there's many people who don't.
Yeah.
They swear by
all
it.
the time.
And that's where I get into discussions with people when they say to me, well, the media said this to me, and I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. I don't listen to media. I analyze. I think. And I think that's the biggest problem our society is today, is we've lost critical thinking skills. Whether it's our education system or people decide I've learned enough, I don't need to learn anything else. We don't think for ourselves anymore. We want to be told. And that's where the influence of media, I think, has crossed the line of telling and directing and pushing and massaging and persuading. And when I point that out to people, they get very upset with me How dare you? I'm like, and this is dangerous because, you know, religion and politics, you're getting in trouble. I mean, I get this constantly. Yes.
I wanted to get your opinion on the viability of the different parties. Not only a lot of people going nonpartisan, but I'm on the board of a couple of Republican clubs, and I find a lot of candidates are not even following policy. They're just using it as a vehicle to get elected because they know that most people would check that R or that D.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
so I don't know where the future is going to be for the parties. So I would love to get your opinion.
Well, I've been writing about that, especially for the Republican Party, because I was a Republican for many years in Ohio. They don't listen anymore. They used to listen. My former office partner is close with Mitch McConnell, and he talks to him every week, and he tells me they don't listen because it used to be the party could control the finances. The party could control the money, which means you're going to follow the party's direction. And now because you can collect money on your own through PACs and super PACs, you're not so beholden to that line anymore. You become going rogue. It is a problem because now we have this issue of party purity versus the idea of what do you stand for? What do you really want other than get elected? When I ran for office, people couldn't understand that. It's like, I'm running to do a job. Well, you know, in 6 months, the party told me, in 6 months you're going to be nominated by the governor who I helped get elected. That was on his committee. You're going to be nominated to the bench. And then after you're on the bench and you win a countywide election, then you're going to go to the state house, and then eventually we're going to put you in the attorney general spot. Because that was my thing. I'm like, oh, great. And I'm like, wait a minute. I want to stay in this job I ran for. I've got things I want to get done. That's not fair to the voters. And they're like, what do you mean? And that's when I said, I'm done. They said, well, you're guaranteed now. From now on, you're it. It's done. Your pathway is